Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Taj Mahal Hotel. The Taj Mansingh, in case you all get confused, since everybody insists on calling it the Taj Mansingh, so welcome to the Taj Mansingh. Lovely to have all of you here this evening. Delighted to have partnered with Teamwork to have literally brought the Jaipur Literature Festival to your doorstep. We've always endeavored at this hotel to create unique, differentiated experiences for all of you. And in that context, I think we're very fortunate that we have the opportunity to actually unveil the Jaipur Literature Festival in this hotel and in this city. You may ask, why Delhi? Why is it happening in Delhi? It probably resonates with one of the themes of this festival, which is the 7 deadly sins. Now, all of which are committed in Jaipur, but then, of course, the city of ours has many, many such sins, and probably that's what makes it worth living. Maybe one for every 7 cities of Delhi, or one sin for every 7 cities of Delhi. Capital vices is probably, that's why they call it the capital vices. Ironically, we now have 7 Taj hotels in the city. Once again, one for every sin, 7 Taj hotels. For this hotel, we will stick to gluttony as the only sin, I'm afraid. Well, only gluttony. Rest of that could be in Jaipur. Well, once again, welcome. And as I said earlier, it's a privilege and honor to have the Jaipur Literature Festival, which is literally a brand which resonates across the world. We're fortunate that it's actually resonating in the walls of this hotel today, this evening. We cannot, unfortunately, recreate the romance of Jaipur or the elegance and charm and beauty of the Diggi Palace, which is literally embodied by the Diggi family, and we're fortunate they've actually traveled from Jaipur to be here this evening. We can't recreate that. But we have tried to recreate almost all the elements of Jaipur Literature Festival this evening here. So, including my friends from Rajasthan, Nathulal and Jugge Khan, they're here too, the real brand ambassadors of this festival. So, ladies and gentlemen, have a lovely evening, and have a thought-provoking evening. Thank you.
Managing Director, Teamwork Arts, producer of the Zee Jaipur Literature Festival, Mr. Sanjay Roy.
Good evening. On behalf of William, Namita, Shuli, and my colleagues, I'd like to welcome you all here this evening. Shashi Tharoor, Ambassador Sarna, Ambassador Hum, Michael Pelletier, ladies and gentlemen. We're very grateful to have with us Ram Pratap and Jyotika from Diggi, all the way in Rajasthan. Thank you very much for coming. My own teacher, Mrs. Krishnan, who also happens to be Satyajit's mother, is also here. Thank you for being here. And Ram Rathore from the Rambagh. Thank you all for gathering together. Today's event was actually conjured up some months ago by Satyajit and Preeta. They said, why don't we have something in Delhi, set up an occasion to have a debate and launch the festival and do that as an annual event. And we said, what a great idea. We've never done this before, but we'd be very happy to do it. And that's how we came to make this evening happen. So thank you very much, Satyajit and Preeta, for putting this together. Unfortunately, we are meeting in not so wonderful times. I think all of us need to mourn the extremely horrible news that came off earlier today. Our hearts go out to all those in Pakistan. And I was saying earlier to the ambassador, it just reinforces the reason why we do what we do. We need more such occasions where there's a meeting of minds, more platforms where people can vent their problems, their ideas, their differences. And if we do more of this, perhaps we will see less violence, less friction, and we will be able to empower ourselves and the world to make it a better place if possible. So in memory of all of those people who passed away today in tragic circumstances, may I please ask all of you to stand and observe a minute of silence. Thank you all very much. Our hearts and prayers go out to all of those people in Pakistan and in many parts of the world. Coming back to this evening, as many of you know, the Zee Jaipur Literature Festival has been growing from strength to strength. We began 8 years ago with a collection of authors and a few thousand people in the Darbar Hall at the Diggi Palace. This year we had 270,000 footfalls from across the world. We had people coming from America, from Australia, from Canada, from China, from Japan, and of course across India. Registrations for this year is already up 214%. And each time people ask Namita, William, and myself, you know, what's with the festival? How is it in such a short time become such an incredible force? And we really say that it is a mixture of a number of things. One is because it's in Jaipur, a place of great historicity. We are at Diggi, which celebrates romance, celebrates mystery, passion, built heritage, the color of Rajasthan, the connectivity there, and above all, the audiences who come together from different parts of India and across the world, they contribute to the festival. An author said to me in the UK the other day, he said, you know, I've never seen so many young people in a literary event, and I've never heard so many interesting questions posed by so many young people. Vikram, my colleague who looks after digital, was sharing with me earlier today the report on our digital presence, and I was astonished to find that 76% of our audiences are between the age groups of 21 and 35. That's fairly astonishing for a literary festival anywhere in the world. And these are some of the reasons why it's grown to be among the biggest free festivals in the world. The Harvard Business School teaches a case study on the festival as to how it grew, how it's created a brand for itself. Earlier this year, we took an extension of the JLF brand to South Bank in London, which was very successful, and we will repeat that every year. Next year will be our first foray into the Americas. We had a wonderful pitch by the city of Boulder, Denver, and Aspen, and the University of Boulder, Colorado, and Naropa Institute, who came to us and said, we heard you wanted to come to America. Will you please consider coming to our neck of the woods? I wasn't entirely sure where it was, so I had to open the map to see fine Boulder, flew in there, and I was absolutely impressed by the kind of minds, the kind of people that we saw there and engaged with, and decided that that's something that we would do. Finally, what makes the festival what it is really our two incredible directors, Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple. between the tomes that they write, and they're always between writing books when the festival comes around, they're able to put together and pull together an incredible array of great minds and great thinkers and weave them in this program that charms, educates, surprises each and every person who comes. Today you can sit on the lawns of Diggy Palace and you can travel the world, and it gives you a window into another philosophy, another history, another culture, into another human being's heart, into another perspective, all from that one very chair. To talk through the festival highlights of next year, please welcome co-directors Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple.
Dear friends of Jaipur, Sanjay is an eloquent and inspired speaker. I'm a bit anxious and will be looking at my notes. It's the sound of the drums, the familiar faces. William and I got a thrill of anxiety, anticipation, joy, thinking of Jaipur in January. The iconic Bangla writer Mahashweta Devi, in her keynote address of 2013, said, "The right to dream is or should be the fundamental human right." On a day when school children have lost their lives and the right to dream to inhuman and mindless brutality, on a day when 2 years ago Nirbhaya was raped and murdered in Delhi, this is a day to assert the right to dream and the right to live and realize our dreams. The Jaipur Festival believes in the human imagination beyond borders, beyond boundaries, nations, and ideologies. I'm proud to be here to give you a little sense of what I have programmed, as William will give his end of it, and how we've brought it together. Some of the themes were planned consciously, some just happened according to the contours of the sessions. One of the main themes this year is poetry. Poetry, the poetic imagination. The keynote speakers are Gyanpith awardee Kedarnath Singh, Vijay Sheshadri, who received the 2014 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, and Arvind Krishna Mehrotra, who will speak across languages, across histories of poetry. And then we have the elusive and iconic Hindi writer Vinod Kumar Shukla, who very rarely ventures out but is kind enough to come to our festival. There is so much else going on, I don't know where to begin. We are honored to be welcoming the former president, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. Then there are a series of sessions which examine the choices that the so-called revolution of rising expectations has created. And there are economists of different persuasions arguing, discussing, forecasting. We also document the Mangalayan with top scientists from India's Mars mission talking about not only the intergalactic missions, but also about a vision of the universe, because we are just a little blue planet out there in a pink city called Jaipur. The cinematic narrative is always well represented in Jaipur. We have Vishal Bharadwaj talking about his new film. We have Javed Akhtar, who returns once again to Jaipur. He only missed it this year with a bad back. He talks about the progressive movement in Hindi and the magic in Urdu and the magic of Urdu, Hindi, Hindustani film songs. And Shabana is there too, Prasoon Joshi. Then there is Nasiruddin Shah on his new book called And Then One Day. And the local Jaipur writer Ram Kumar Singh of Z Plus fame, and not to forget the immortal actor Wahida Rahman on her life and times in what I think will be one of the great sessions of the opening day. Rohan Murthy introduces the Murthy Classical Library of India with readings from the original and in translation from Bulle Shah in Punjabi, Abul Fazl from the Persian, the Terigata from the Old Pali, Alasani Pedana from Telugu, and Surdas in Hindi. Sheldon Pollock, the editor of the MCLI, will speak on the need and necessity for a library of classical Indian literature. And then we will let Sanskrit speak for itself. Sanskrit, the subject of so much recent scrutiny and debate, will have the revered Pandit Satyavrat Shastri in a session titled Sanskrit, the Living Heritage. Now, for those of you who don't know what Neprak means, Neprak is an acronym for Nai Prem Kahani, which is a new movement in Hindi literature. And we are proud to launch Ravish Kumar's compulsive Hindi nanofiction, which is in the new Neprak genre. And Pushpesh Pant has translated Mo Yan, the Chinese writer Mo Yan's Change, into Hindi, and it's titled Hum Tum or Wo Truck. So there's a lot of movement between languages, between cultures. The theme of the 7 deadly sins, already explicated upon so eloquently by my co-director and by Satyajit, that deliberates is actually a very serious theme, and we look not only at sins, sinners, and sinning, but at the changing ethics and perceptions of sin, and at how societies and religions understand right and wrong. And on the same strain, Niels Norberg and Håkon Nesser speak of Nordic noir and of the contemporary Scandinavian crime writing with its dark currents, philosophical underpinnings. We shall be welcoming Nobel laureate V.S. Naipaul to Jaipur and celebrating and honoring 50 years since the publication of A House for Mr. Biswas. We have, as ever, an incredible bandwidth of literary talent from Neel Mukherjee, Amit Chaudhary, Raj Kamal Jha, S.R. Farooqi, Ashwin Sanghi, Chetan Bhagat, Amish Tripathi, Urmila Pawar, Sushma Deshpande, Mahua Majhi, Rakshanda Jalil, Sangeeta Bandyopadhyay, C. Mrinalini, many, many others. We look forward to writers from France and Spain, Australia and Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and so many other spots in the world. Today, on December 16th, we rededicate ourselves to giving voice and resonance to women's writing. And our series, Women Uninterrupted, continues from last year, speaking of justice, equity, and freedom from fear. And finally, a tribute to Jaipur, that beautiful city we all know, we all love, modern, cosmopolitan, yet with the imprint of history and heritage. The folk songs, the heroic ballads, the visual and performative arts of Rajasthan are all celebrated every year at our festival, and they will do so again. So until January, until Jaipur, a toast to dreams, to human imagination, to books and reading, ideas, engagement, and the ongoing process of dialogue that make our worlds go round. Thank you.
Sanjoy said some very nice things about Namita and I, so I suppose we're going to have to reciprocate and say something nice about teamwork. Just to give you a scale of what they pull off each year, between Diggy and Teamwork, the Diggy end produces over the 5 days 14,700 hot meals. Teamwork books 1,800 hotel nights for 240 participants. The bookshop sells 10,000 books. I occasionally get some writer in Delhi saying, "Oh, no one goes there to buy books." 10,000 books are sold in the course of the festival, and we host 75,000 people a day. One of my favorite ever reviews of the festival, I will just read out because it just makes me giggle each time I hear it. "It's settled," said Time Out. "The Jaipur Literature Festival is officially the Woodstock, Live 8 and Ibiza of world literature. The Frankfurt Book Fair or the Booker Prize Awards are like watching the Pope sleep compared to the ambience, best described as James Joyce meets Monsoon Wedding. The authors were treated somewhere between Bono doing an air dive and Salman Khan taking his shirt off at an auto rickshaw driver's convention." And I think this is what makes Jaipur work, because we can program all the authors we ever want, we can cook as many hot meals as Rajasthan can eat, but it is that incredible buzz. And it comes, I think, as much as anything from, as Sanjoy said, from the incredible youth of our festival. Going to some of the festivals in Britain over the summer, a lot of them are like sort of saga pensioners gatherings with lots of very elegant old ladies sitting on deck chairs. Our audiences are so young, so vibrant. One thing I would recommend anyone doing the festival is go down one night leave the parties and go down to Jaipur railway station of an evening, and you will see there kids who have travelled, found their way across India, from Assam, from Tamil Nadu, who are sleeping rough on the railway station, and they've come all the way just to hear the writers. It is, I think, very difficult to understand some of the effort that people make to get to this festival. It's all very well for us here sitting in the Taj to get in our chauffeur-driven cars or whatever. But of those 250,000 people that turn up, large numbers of people are saving up, are going to incredible lengths to get to us. We have, as ever, a wonderful selection of major prize winners. We always try and get at least one Booker Prize winner. One year we got Pamuk and Coetzee, which is something that we've never quite managed to do again. But getting Naipaul along with Paul Theroux and Hanif Qureshi, whose latest novel is a riff, I think is close to that. We've got three major Pulitzer Prize winners in prose, Kai Bird, Adam Johnson, and Gilbert King. We've got most of the Booker shortlist, including last year's winner, Eleanor Catton, Sarah Waters, Will Self, Neil Mukherjee. What is a great pleasure as a director is when that sort of instinct of the hunter, when you've been after a writer for 4 or 5 years and finally they give up and come. Sarah Waters I've been chasing for 6 years. She's finally come. Alberto Manguel, I finally persuaded last year to come. Then he had a heart attack. But this year, we're not going to let him off the hook. And he's come. One of the great literary writers and thinkers, author of Short History of Reading and The Library at Night. Two of probably the world's most successful, or certainly highest-selling travel writers ever. Paul Theroux, whose Great Railway Bazaar sold 7 million copies, and Elizabeth Gilbert, whose Eat, Pray, Love sold 5 million copies. On maths and economics, Nicholas Nassim Taleb will talk about his famous black swan theory, about the exceptional events which change the world. Things so unpredictable that no one can guess them, and yet this happens regularly enough to be a major part of our lives. Simon Singh, probably the most successful popularizer of mathematics, author of the Code Book and Fermat's Enigma, is going to talk intriguingly about The Simpsons, the cartoon strip, and The Simpsons' mathematical secrets, something I have to say passed me by when I watched them, but apparently there's all sorts of codes in there. Another author I've been chasing for, I think, literally 6-7 years now, Kate Summerscale, wrote an extraordinary book, which I recommend to all of you, called The Suspicions of Mr. Witcher, one of the most brilliantly constructed non-fiction books I've ever read, about the true detective story, really the first ever detective story, which inspired Wilkie Collins, Dickens, and Conan Doyle. It has a body, a detective, a country house, soaked in secrets, everything you could possibly want from a detective story. We've got a great deal about the classics this year. Namit has already mentioned us launching the Murti Classical Library. But we have a fantastic array of people talking about the classical world, classical literature, the difficulties of translating classics and making them live for the present. Simon Armitage, who has done a wonderful version of the Iliad, is going to come and talk about that. We have Bethany Hughes, who's just painstakingly spent the last 10 years piecing together Socrates' life. He's going to use fresh evidence to look at the man who famously asked, "How should we live?" A question, of course, as relevant now as it was in Athens at the time. Tom Holland, who managed to get Herodotus into the English bestseller list for the first time in 2,000 years, is coming to speak about that. We've got also a lot of very brilliant biographers. Yung Chang is returning to talk about her biography of Zhu Xi, the last empress. Mark Gevisser, the biographer of Thabo Mbeki, is coming from South Africa. Lucy Hughes-Hallett, who beat me to 2 prizes last year, and talking about one of them, Gabrielle D'Annunzio, her extraordinary biography of the Pike. Credible book about one of it's subtitled Poet and Seducer. Fantastic stuff. Anita Anand, the biographer of Sophia Dulip Singh, is going to talk about her new book. We've got a lot about war, a lot about what war makes people do, how literature is inspired by war, the terrible things that happen within war, the heart-wrenching events, how it inspires literature. We've got Hisham Matar coming from Libya, Helen Habila coming from Nigeria, Kevin Powers, one of the most extraordinary young novelists in America who was a gunner in the Iraq War, Kamla Shamsi writing about Peshawar. We've got a great deal about adaptation of novels. Hanif Qureshi, of course, who did My Beautiful Laundrette and The Builder of Suburbia. Paul Theroux, whose Mosquito Coast was a movie with Harrison Ford. Elizabeth Gilbert again, Eat, Pray, Love, with Lauren Child, who did Charlie and Lola, one of the most popular children's stories. A lot more children's literature this year. We have a dedicated Ford Samvad stage for children's literature, but we've got some extraordinary children's writers coming. There's wonderful stuff about China. I think China is something we've neglected at the festival to date. We've got An Chi Min, who was Mao's favorite film star, talking about surviving the Cultural Revolution in that very perilous position. We have Ma Jian, a leading dissident writer, author of Red Dust, and Yung Chang, of course, talking about Mao. We're going to have sessions on how to write erotica, criticism, art history, historical novels and memoir. We're going to take a new look at Lawrence of Arabia, Homer and Marie Antoinette. We'll have sessions on tigers, lesbians, bumblebees, Neanderthals, pirates and aesthetics, detective and spooks. And we'll explore the world of the CIA and the wilderness of mirrors that spies inhabit. It's going to be an utterly amazing few days. We hope you will join us there. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Thank you, Namita. As you all know, that's really quite a fantastic program that's been lined up starting from the 21st of January to the 25th. Registrations have been open for a while, and as I said, 214% or so up. This is that time of the evening where we're actually going to go into the debate, but before that, I just need to acknowledge our wonderful advisors who are here, Neeta Gupta, Urvashi Butalia, and our two new advisors, Poonam Malhotra and Priyanka. There they are, our wonderful new advisors. Thank you all very much for coming on board as advisors to the Jaipur Literature Festival, and we hope together we'll be able to make it richer. We also have with us Neeta Gupta, who with Namita has been putting together JBM, which is the Jaipur Bookmark. A few years ago, we realized that we needed a space where publishers, agents, authors, translators could come together to discuss what they did best, the whole business of publishing. And the Jaipur Bookmark was born, and it was born with wonderful support by the Norwegian government and the Norwegian embassy and the book office, and I'd like to thank the ambassador for being so supportive about making it happen each year, and in fact inviting us earlier this year to come to Norway to set up a version of Jaipur in Norway, which we need to take you up on at some point of time. So thank you very much on that. None of this would be possible without the support of, obviously, many of our sponsors. The festival is an expensive festival. Many people don't realize that each person who comes in there walks in free, yes, but it is an expense. You get a badge and you get registered and you get a brochure and you find a chair and you go to the loo, and all of that adds up to a fairly substantial cost. And we'd like to thank Zee, who are our principal sponsors of the festival, so the Zee Jaipur Literature Festival, the Mahindra Humanities Center from Harvard, who now are part of the Darbar Hall, and the Indian Quarterly, the IQ magazine, Google, Glenn Livett, who keeps us warm on those particularly cold nights, and I think motivates the authors to perform and step up to the table when they're called to do so. Amazon, who is our official book partner. Ford's really been supportive, looking after the young people's space. Our belief always has been that we need to create a program especially for them. We have an extension program. I don't know whether most of you know, pre the festival, we go to schools that cannot necessarily access the festival, These are normally schools and educational institutions which could be economically disadvantaged. And earlier we used to do about 20 to 25 institutions. This year we plan to reach out to about 50 of them. We also do a fantastic workshop with children from both sides of the economic divide, and some of what they do gets performed at the festival, and much of this is done by Pratham Books in partnership with the Yuva Ekta Foundation. We have the United Nations Women, and this year we have a lovely series, Women Uninterrupted, looking again at gender equity. The Aga Khan Foundation, thanks to William, have come on board. They're supporting some of our music stage and of course our program, our literature program itself. And the Rajasthan government has come back as a supporter. We didn't have them earlier this year, but we are very glad to welcome them back as one of our supporters next year, and Incredible India. Moving on to the debate, the way it works is I'm going to introduce our 4 speakers, and I'll invite them to come up. Each of them will get 4 minutes each. At 3.5 minutes, they'll get a warning drumbeat. For those who've been at the festival there, some of them tend to jump off out of their clothes because it's dramatic, but that's the idea. 4 minutes, the drum will continue. We will then have 2 minutes each for repartees between the speakers. I will open it up to the House for any questions that you may have, and then there'll be closing statements from each of the speakers again for 2 minutes each, and then I will poll the House. The proposition today, before the proposition, let me invite up without any particular order Urvashi Butalia. Urvashi is one of our advisors. She's also Indian feminist publisher. She was the co-founder of Kali for Women. She's written a number of books, including The Other Side of Silence, which is a wonderful piece which I've been very keen to turn into a theatre production anyway. And she is the founder of Zuban Books, which publishes some of the most brilliant writing in recent years. Urvashi Butalia. Navteej Sarna, former Indian ambassador to Israel. Navteej, I think, has been the longest serving spokesperson for the Ministry of External Affairs. His latest post is that of Secretary West. He has served across the world in Moscow, Warsaw, Thimphu, Geneva, Tehran, and Washington. He actually represents the divide that we're going to discuss today, having written in equal measures half of his books in fiction and half of his books in non-fiction. His latest one in Jerusalem, based in Jerusalem, is at Herod's Gate. We have both Urvashi and Navteej are speaking for the motion. Against the motion, we have Anuja Chauhan, who is an author and advertising professional. She's worked in the advertising agency JWP India for over 17 years, eventually becoming vice president and executive creative director. She's written a number of books, including The Zoya Factor, Battle for Bitora, those pricey Thakur girls, and she loves a whole host of topics, including glamorous high-pressure world of Indian cricket, and the second is about the heat and dust of a Lok Sabha election. Thank you. Anuja has flown in from Bombay. We have Dr. Shashi Tharoor, former diplomat. Dr. Tharoor is 2-time Member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram and one of the few members of Parliament to be elected into the present Lok Sabha from the Congress Party. He was the Under Secretary General for Communication and Public Information at the United Nations, which he gave up to come back to India. He has a number of books on both sides of the divide that he's written, including Midnight, The Millennium, Nehru, The Invention of India, and he's been awarded the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman as well as the Commonwealth Writers' Prize. Thank you all very much for being here. The proposition was coined with much care by William and Namita. I remember Satyajit saying to me, you know, anything that you all do normally gets you into trouble. Can we do something that's at least safe or as safe as can be, you know, knowing you'll do something. So I said, no, we will do a completely very formal, very elaborate, non-controversial topic, which is fact versus fiction, this house proposes the center of literary action is moving from the novel to non-fiction. Before I asked the audience to poll whether they would vote for the motion or against the motion in the beginning, I was asking Anuj Bahari a little while ago when he walked in. I said, Anuj, so at your bookshop, Bahari Sons, roughly what happens? What's the balance between fiction and non-fiction sales? And he gave me a surprising figure of saying that 75% of books sell in the non-fiction series. And this is not educational books, I'm assuming. Anuj, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. This is not educational because if you add educational, it's a whole different skew. And 35% books sell in the fiction series. So ladies and gentlemen, with a show of hands, I propose to you the center of literary action is moving from the novel to non-fiction. If you agree, please raise your hands. Okay, that's a very small number. So let's keep that in mind and come back at the end of the debate and see whether they've been able to convince you on either which side, and I will poll you at the end again. To begin with, let me ask Urvashi Budalia to open the debate.
The deliberations have been set up, sorry, I'll switch it on. My time starts now. It's been set up as a debate, so you're required to speak in favor of something called the motion. I'm not actually going to do that. I'm a publisher. I don't want to lose my job because I publish both fiction and non-fiction. And I'm going to, in the true spirit of JLF, subvert the agenda and say exactly what I want to say and what I think is right. I'm going to speak from my experience as a writer and a publisher. First, the writer part of me, which is a smaller part of me than the publisher part. I've spent many, many years researching the partition of India, over 10 years, looking at people's accounts and hearing stories which were really much, much stranger and much, much more, much deeper and much more traumatic than you might have been able to imagine in fiction. And I don't think that that could have happened in fiction. Had I been a writer of fiction, I don't think I would have been able to capture that moment in quite the same way as I did in writing non-fiction. So my experience as a writer leads me to think that this is the form that allows you much more depth and nuance than, say, fiction does in India. I'm not talking about it generally. And my experience as a publisher of women's books and a publisher who is politically committed to bringing to the forefront marginalized voices leads me to believe that the form of fiction in India, particularly the novel and particularly in English, is a form with which writers are not yet confident, where they are caught in the trap of plot, character, action, subplot, which they're not able to do effectively. This is why in the last several years, when you look at the fiction that's been published in the country, there are very few things that come to mind that have stayed with you and that have moved you in ways that other books have not done. I read manuscripts all the time, and the last fiction manuscript I was reading, I was on page 200, and the character, the central character, had only just started going to university, and I was exhausted thinking, how many more pages is it going to take? So the economy of thought, the economy of structure, the economy of character, the economy of building a good work of fiction is something that our writers, I feel, are not terribly confident about just yet. As far as nonfiction is concerned, the kind of books I publish, often by women who are not writers, but who want to write and give expression to what they write, poor women, marginalized women, Dalit women, to them, truth-telling of the kind that you see in nonfiction comes much more naturally. It is much more versatile. They can write autobiography, they can write biography, they can write travel writing, they can write journalistic accounts, and they can think in many more ways to write what they want to say. And often they can do a combination of writing fact and fiction, as many Dalit writers do, and give it a new name, faction. Base it on your life, but give it a fictional form, but everybody knows that this is a kind of truth-telling that you don't otherwise see. So to me, this is extremely important, the combination and the versatility of the form. Just imagine Rana Dasgupta writing Delhi, imagining a situation where two poets, Ashok Vajpayee meets Voltaire, and they talk about Delhi. you'd get faction. It would be much better than novels which run for 800 pages and do not build character, do not build plot. So my thing is on the side of nonfiction. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Urvashi. Speaking against the motion, Anuja Chauhan.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I have sort of slightly stuck to the syllabus, and I'm speaking very clearly, and luckily this also happens to be what I believe, that fiction is the best way to get a story or a point or anything else that you want to say across. It's a bit of a guess that I'm taking, but I imagine there are two kinds of people in this room. The first kind of people are the ones who, as teenagers, found out about the birds and the bees by smutty reading through the Kama Sutra. And the other half of people who, as teenagers, might have found out about the birds and the bees by reading the early pages of Mario Puzo's The Godfather. Now, which was more evocative? The insert A into B, dry, plodding, gynecological recordings of Vatsayan, or the wild, wild doings of the well-endowed Sonny Corleone? For me, Sonny won, hands down. And this is because all good fiction has, at the heart of it, a personal story that keeps us hooked and propels us through the pages and brings alive a period or a series of happenings more vividly than even the best nonfiction can. And because interest in the American Civil War will inevitably fade as newer wars explode around us, the thing that will endure and that will keep us rereading Gone with the Wind is the Scarlet and Red Butler romance. And that is why nonfiction always grows less relevant over time, while fiction makes a transition from popular novel of the moment to enduring classic. The numbers tell their own story. In India, fiction outsells nonfiction about 3:1. Chetan Bhagat's What Young India Wants is at 1,43,000 copies, only selling about 1/10 of what his latest novel, Half Girlfriend, sold in 2 months. And that is because What Young India Wants is a non-fiction book. Internationally, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, the scholarly, non-fictional work which first puts forward the concept of Christ's bloodline being the Holy Grail, sold only a fraction of what the Da Vinci Code sold. Non-fiction really is the plain, worthy, stolid, older sibling of that sparkling, entrancing creature called fiction. But now it's getting savvier, and that's why suddenly I think all this, girlish new interest in non-fiction. Reality shows like Big Boss and Indian Idol, which, are being sold to us as non-fiction and gritty reality and blah-de-blah, are actually entirely scripted, right down to the last slap, the last judge's argument, or the last catty comment. The recent very successful biopic, which is Bhag Milka Bhag, had the flying Sikh Milka Singh flying straight into the arms of this buxom blonde Australian beauty the night before his big race. And this is when the real-life Milka has admitted that he has not even held hands with a woman before he was married. So what we have, I think it's what Urvashi was saying again, it's this very, it's non-fiction, which is, it's kind of fictionalized stuff which is masquerading as non-fiction. In fact, a lot of literary selfies, which is now the racy new name that we're giving to autobiographies, have as the ultimate compliment, autobiographies have the ultimate compliment printed at the back, which says, reads like fiction. And so to conclude, I would suggest to you that there was one more thing, which might be a slightly meandering point, but I felt I should make this. I mean, if you've read The Life of Pi, and I don't want to put forth any spoilers here, but about 2/3 way through the book, whoa. Oh, then, okay, fine. So I'll skip The Life of Pi. So to conclude, I suggest to you that the recent interest in nonfiction is mostly due to the fact that nonfiction has finally wised up and started tricking itself out a lot like fiction. But this is not a victory for nonfiction. It's actually a victory for fiction. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anuja. That was fantastic. Speaking for the motion, Navdeep Sarna.
I think before I start, a very short correction, if I may. I think this proposition should be read as it was conceived and not as it has been written. It puts novel against non-fiction. Novel is one genre of fiction, as non-fiction is a whole gamut of things. But be that as we did, that is how I'm going to take it. And two things, inspired by the last speaker, I will say that my case is not. First, it's not my case that fiction is better than non-fiction or non-fiction is better than fiction. There is no value judgment attached to this proposition. The second is not my case, as no doubt somebody would want to make it, is that the novel is dead or dying or terminally ill. And in fact, if those who know want to say, the undertakers have been saying it, that it's been dying for the last 100 years, ever since James Joyce dealt it a devastating blow in Finnegan's Wake. Nevertheless, there is no hope, there is no fear that JLF 2020 will have a massive burial of the novel in the centerpiece lawns. So this is not the case. The case simply is that today the center of literary action has moved from the novel to fiction. Now, what is the literary action? Literary action is publishing, writing, sales, readers, getting into the glass window of Bari Sons. That is literary action. Reviews, publicity, celebrity launches. And if you go by bestseller lists, my point is simply this. Forget the values, forget the utility. What is happening most, non-fiction or fiction? There's nothing like hard evidence. New York Times bestseller list. The combined print and e-book numbers for fiction. Maximum is, well, would you believe it, Gone Girl. 106 weeks on the bestseller list. Grey Mountain by John Grisham, 7 weeks. And there are a couple of poor things. Hardly anybody makes it to the double-figure list of weeks. As against that, the non-fiction. You have 182 weeks of Unbroken, which is an Olympic runner's story of survival as a prisoner of the Japanese in World War II. You have 90 weeks for Wild, a woman's account of a life-changing 1,100-mile hike along the Pacific Crest Trail, and so on and so forth. Everything reaches 40 weeks, 50 weeks. And what about our own? I know public memory is short, but if you just look back over the last 6 months, what are the big books that you can remember? Rajdeep Sardesai, Sanjay Baru, Natwar Singh, Sachin Tendulkar's biography, and so on, and novel. Perhaps there's Half a Girlfriend here, if you can call it that. But the second point that I want to make is that why has this action moved? Why has the center point moved? And that's got something to do with technology. Suddenly, there is a new form of writing. That is the 5,000 to 15,000 in-depth story, intensively researched, not the 800-word newspaper story, not the mammoth book, but this. And there are new platforms for this. There are technologically developed multimedia platforms which are doing extremely well. You have things like the longreads.com, you have Gothamist, and they're paying. The Longshot platform is paying $2,000 for its cover story. The Gothamist is paying $5,000 for a non-fiction story of 15,000 words. Now, is that or is that not going to move the action as against somebody who writes a book for 2 years, and let's forget about the payment? I know before that deadly, devastating drum roll.
Thank you very much, Navteej. Shashi.
Well, I can assure you you're going to get no literary theory from me. I never even studied literature in college. I thought that would be like learning about girls in medical school. So I just love reading, and I've written some fiction and some non-fiction. Sadly, more of the latter now. But I don't agree that one is giving way to the other. Very simply, the whole idea of fiction itself is relatively recent. I mean, when Homer wrote what he wrote, no one thought he was writing a novel. When the epics were conceived, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, no one saw them as fiction. They were seen as legends, recreations of the tales of their times, histories in a sense. And in fact, 2,500 years after Homer, when Robinson Crusoe was published, they actually presented it as a true story. Defoe didn't describe it as a novel, simply because no one would have bought it or cared for it otherwise. It's only slowly after Robinson Crusoe, through the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe, that the notion emerged that a story could actually be meaningful without being factual. That you could, somewhere between truth and falsehood lies something else. A world where, frankly, something can be realistic without being real. Something can actually be referential without referring to real events, can be believable without attempting to evoke belief, can touch a truth which perhaps is greater than the truths that have actually ever happened. That is what fiction's all about. Now, whether Navtej wants to debunk it or not, the fact is that there are people arguing that fiction is dead or dying. And indeed, in the era of television and social media, as Anuja has pointed out, we are living in a world where everybody is into self-confessionals and memoirs. Everyone's talking about themselves. You're tweeting about your life. You're tweeting, you're sort of going on Oprah Winfrey and God knows which other equivalents in our country and talking about everything that's non-fictional about your existence. And so the suggestion is that's all people want. But I would argue that, in fact, people want to learn from non-fiction, which is why you've got Navtej's long lists of bestsellers. But they actually learn much more from fiction than they do from non-fiction. I don't know how many of you remember a beer commercial that talked about a beer that reaches parts that other beers can't reach. Fiction is something that reaches parts of you that other books can't reach, that non-fiction can't reach. Ultimately, good fiction is not an escape from the world. It's actually an indirect mode of engaging with it in a very different way from straightforward narratives of facts. A well-told story has always been the greatest way of communicating a serious lesson. Every culture has used stories to teach lessons. Aesop wrote fables. The Panchatantra was full of didactic lessons in our culture. Jesus taught parables, right? The Grimm brothers wrote little gory stories of warning to the young people of their time. And if you come to more recent years, what was Uncle Tom's Cabin? It was a novel, but it was fundamental for the abolition of slavery in mid-19th century America. In the civil rights movement, you think about a book like Invisible Man, which was a novel, but which completely changed the way America thought about race relations. And so on. The Vietnam War. There have been so many books about the Vietnam War. The ones that are memorable, that have most affected the way in which people remember the war in America are things like novels by Tim O'Brien, you know, the things they carried, or Going After Cacciato. These are the things that entered people's consciousness about the actual experience of the war, even though these were novels. So, fiction these days seems to be used to embellish non-fiction. If you want to see examples of that, just try any one of the biographies of Narendra Modi. And you'll get lots of fiction in there as well. In fact, when Urvashi talked about reaching page 200 without the hero having yet gone to university, I wondered, was she reading a biography of Narendra Modi or so-called fiction? But anyway, the fact is that fiction has a great deal going for it.
So much for Satyajit's request of keeping it non-controversial. There goes that one. 2 minutes to each of you to refute each other, throw things at each other, whatever you wish, starting with Urvashi.
Thank you. I just want to refute what Anuja said. Statistics about sales in India are notoriously unreliable. Bestsellers are made by a phone call made by a journalist to 3 bookshops in Khan Market, and he's told that, oh, we've sold 20 copies of this book, and it enters the bestseller charts. Today, we have some people called Nielsen who pride themselves on collecting statistics, but they only provide statistics of those publishers, very rich ones, who can be their members. So people like us don't come into any counting, so those statistics can be quickly dismissed. Secondly, Shashi made the point about good fiction, and that is precisely the point. The center is shifting to non-fiction because there is very little good, competent fiction around. Were there good fiction writers, Anuja accepted, then you would have a real competition. But non-fiction, there is so much to write and so many good writers experimenting with new forms that you're getting a variety which is extremely rich fare. Thank you.
Yeah, so my source was the Nielsen's. I don't know what source you have, which says that the non-fiction figures are actually much better than the fiction figures. I'd be very interested to hear that. Yeah, no, but that is, I did speak to a few people because I, like to keep the numbers very short, but these are the numbers I got. That non-fiction is definitely selling It was the figure, in fact, I put a conservative estimate. I got between 5:1 and 4:1. I actually said 3:1, which is why I paused before I said it. That's my only point on that. Of course, good books versus bad books is a debate that is eternal, and it is always going to be the good books. But that's always such a subjective thing, you know, like what is a good book or not. I actually had something to counter what you said. You know, if we say that in the last few months, the big books that sold are Rajdeep's book and, you know, the various other books you named, I'd be very curious to see how much longer those books will sustain for, because that is one thing that happens with nonfiction, that it is very, very time-bound. And once people lose interest in this particular election and move on, they'll still be buying Half Girlfriend. Okay.
May I?
Maybe not Half Girlfriend, maybe there are lots of other books they would be buying. But, you know.
Anuja's books.
Yeah, mine.
Navtej.
Well, I don't know if you remember, but at least I think in Shashi and my college time, there used to be a saying called that stalemate is last year's girlfriend. So I think more or less, if it's half a girlfriend, I don't see much future for that relationship. But the point that I would like to make, both on which you said and what Shashi referred to, as how fiction is being used to embellish non-fiction. I would like to simply say that in the fiction, in fact, the fiction that is doing well is the fiction that has some basis in fact. Perhaps more people are reading, and they are not all literature students. A lot of people want to read something which they can relate to a place, a person, a date, and these are the books that sell. There's no doubt William Dalrymple's bankers will tell you. And that is why, if you take a look at the Booker Prize winners for the last 5 years, 6 years, with the exception of Sense of an Ending by Julian Barnes, and the possible exception of Winkler's Ghost, all of them are historical novels. So there is a certain move, and here is where fiction and non-fiction are merging. The borderlines are gradually, I mean, what is fiction and what is non-fiction? So fictional techniques are being used to embellish non-fiction.
Shashi?
Have a mic.
I just think I heard Navtej agree with our side of the debate, but maybe didn't you? So, you know, this is being a bit one-sided. Urvashi says she will subvert the topic, so obviously it was in our favor, and now Navtej has done the same. But just to say that on these bestseller lists, I mean, the honest truth is that it simply shows that in fiction you have that much more to choose from. You see, you've just got one big non-fiction book of the week that everyone's talking about, whereas there are different things out there. All right, that was a debating point. We can move on. I did want to say, though, that one of the things that we haven't addressed is this. The topic says that the novel is giving way to nonfiction. Are we going to talk about giving way in the sense of bestseller lists, as Navtej did, or in terms of readability, as Urvashi implied with her 200-page narrative and all that? Or does giving way mean that this particular discipline, this particular form, is being supplanted by another one? And be very honest, there is no evidence for that. Those who, as I said, want to get timeless, immortal insights into the human condition, those who want to see the larger truth than they get in the breaking news, which has already broken their spirits on television the whole day, they will go for stories, they will go for novels, because ultimately that is the deeper truth. And as Anuja pointed out, there are novels published decades ago, centuries ago, that we still read. No one's going to read the political polemic of the 1890s, and I'm afraid that's going to be true of the 2010s as well when the time comes. So let's understand that yes, I got the message. So let's understand that ultimately that timelessness is an appeal, but equally that the quality has not given way, and that this enduring quality of fiction is what suggests that it has not given way to nonfiction.
I'm going to open the question to the House, but just before that, I just wanted to address Urvashi's question. And Urvashi, this whole issue of, there's not enough good writing that's coming out. I'm wondering, much of what we've been discussing, I suspect, has been in the space of the English writing in fiction. Isn't it perhaps true that much of the richness of the writing in India actually belongs to the languages? And if much of that could be translated cross languages and, of course, perhaps some into English, you'd find a far richer narrative there, of something closer to the hearts and souls of people. Because I think if you look at the numbers, when you look at fiction in the language categories, those sell in enormous numbers, and that's far from dead.
You're right. I clarified in the beginning that I was talking about English and the kind of publishing that I know. And in that, I can tell you that publishers are now quite reluctant to approach fiction because so much of it is not good enough, doesn't come up to the mark, and they're very excited by nonfiction. So I have many of my colleagues will look and say, don't you have anything non-fictional? That's in English. In the Indian languages, and I'm glad you didn't call them regional languages, it is true that there is wonderful fiction. The non-fiction writing in the Indian languages, in some languages, is further ahead than others, but it's coming up now in very interesting ways also. So it's not as if one form is better than the other. It's just that at this moment, I think non-fiction is asserting its presence much more.
Mrs. Krishnan raised her hand. Can we get a mic here, please?
Well, I'm sorry. When I heard the topic was fiction versus non-fiction, somehow I was led to believe that you would be discussing what is the difference and what is the ability of the people who produce fiction, non-fiction. That is where the verses will come in. We were just quoting how much is sold and how much is not sold, not discussing, Shashi Tharoor has a little bit, discussing the quality of the thing and how is it versus the other. If it is just simple sort of information being given, there's so much so it's being sold, where is the topic to discuss, of course?
Would any of you like to respond?
Thank you, ma'am. I think you have really put the point where it should have been put. And if the topic had been writing fiction versus writing non-fiction, or reading fiction versus reading non-fiction, I assure you that's what would have been done. But the topic is that the center of literary action has shifted. And unfortunately, that is how literary action is today being regarded, as to which books are being read, which are being criticized, which are being reviewed. I have no issue at all with the fact that one may be better than the other, and different abilities and the timelessness of fiction over non-fiction. But unfortunately, it is only a statement of fact that more and more attention, whether for reasons of time that people have, whether for reasons of technology that people employ, is being used on non-fiction, unfortunately, in my view, than on fiction. But it's a fact.
That's not your fault.
Can Anuj, can we get a mic across there? Sunil?
I'd like to explain to Mrs. Krishnan. Money is very, very important in publishing today. And it's a known fact the world over that 80% of the publishing in the world, which is technically what we say as non-fiction, is actually sustained by the 20% fiction, where copies sell in millions. And those millions are the money that actually pays to bring out this quality non-fiction writing and brings the thoughts of the people to us.
Just after this one. Sir. Yes, it's on.
Something very interesting happened between what Shashi said and what she mentioned about regional languages. One day I was just sitting, reading some book or the other, and all of a sudden I thought of the Hindi word kahani. And it struck me that jo kaha or jo nahi kaha. I broke up the word and I found that somewhere in between, what is said and what is not said is a kahani. So it is fiction. And always when I was a kid, I heard the story, ek tha raja, ek thi rani, dono mar gaye, khatam kahani, etc., etc. So one was very fascinated by what just happened on stage. I just want to share this moment that perhaps the debate needs to be relooked at, that there is an overlap somewhere between what is said and what is not said, fiction and non-fiction.
Thank you. Tony?
Yeah, I would like you to consider redefining how you categorize books from a customer's viewpoint. You're coming very much from the writer's viewpoint. We are the guys who are buying the books and paying for them. So we want to know whether the book is going to make us laugh, or is it going to give us some life skills, or is it going to give us skills to fantasize, and so on and so forth. That's the kind of classification that will make sense to us, so that when we see the category, we know what to pick up rather than go through this muddle of fiction and non-fiction. And we know that we live in a world where everything is an illusion, right? Maya. So what is the debate about?
Thank you. You wanted to respond? There's a mic right next to Navtej.
I love your formulation of the reader as we are the guys who are paying for the books. I thought I might remind you that we are the guys also who pay to print those damn things and publish them. So it's not only you.
No more questions. I'm going to go back to each of you and ask you for closing statements in no particular order. Maybe Shashi, you could start. Navtej.
आप इस बार कुछ मत कीजिएगा. Because I thought that since I did speak in defense of fiction, I'll end by telling you two stories. The first is a story about an Englishman in the 50s, I think it was, or the early 60s, who presumed to tell a class that he would teach them how to write a best-selling novel. And he said, it's very simple. There's a clear formula. This is England. You have to have 4 elements. You have to have religion, aristocracy, sex, and mystery. And it's got to be brief. Then you have a best-selling novel on your hands. So the students went off to do their assignments, and one chap came back within a few minutes. His entire novel consisted of one sentence. It said, "My God," exclaimed the Duchess of Argyle, "I'm pregnant. Who did it?" God, aristocracy, sex, and mystery all in one sentence, and stunningly brief. That was the end of his attempts to teach how to write a best-selling novel. Fiction is a craft. And I want to end with a story which actually goes back to not just something regional, but the language that has been the subject of much attention of late. Sanskrit, genuinely a story from the Puranas, a story about 2,000 years old. It's a story about truth. It turns out that this dashing young prince, warrior, who wanted to marry a beautiful young princess. So when she went to the king to ask for her hand, the king said, he just thought the fellow was too cocksure and callous. So he said, you can have my daughter's hand when you have found truth. So the warrior got onto his horse and galloped off in quest of truth. And he went to forests where ascetics scourged themselves. He went to mountaintops where naked sadhus meditated. He went to monasteries where people tried to commune with the otherworldly. He went to all sorts of hermitages, all sorts of places, but he could not find the truth. Despairing one day and seeking refuge from a thunderstorm, he found shelter in a dark and musty cave. And there in the darkness, he spotted this old hag, a wizened old crone, with matted hair and warts on her face, the skin hanging from her bones in folds on her face, her arms, etc. But she seemed to know what he was looking for. And they started talking. And as the conversation continued, he realized he had come to the end of his quest. She was truth. So they talked all night, he and this wizened old hag. And then in the morning, when the storm broke and dawn had come, the warrior really could go off and claim his prize. As he was about to get back on his horse and go back to the palace, he said to the old lady, "Thank you. What can I tell them at the palace about you?" And the wizened old crone says, Tell them that I'm young and beautiful." So, truth does exist, but even truth needs fiction to market itself. Thank you very much. That's the motion.
Thank you. I think that's a hard act to follow. That should actually be a closing statement for the evening. Shashi, as always, is there for all of us. See, so obviously the debate is over. There's no point for us to discuss. Proposition, I presume, has been said, and we now the stories. No questions and I think ultimately it's not his watered component. It's not that any fiction. It's not that any book, pure non-fiction, right? Anything like or fiction. Everything is rooted in your reality, your perceived reality. It's everything that you write through your own consciousness. It's not my first novel, and love like that. Everybody started walking on very clear, sort of all right, because I keep missing. My wife was still living. She had not gone away with my best friend, with my young 10-year-old son. Everybody thinks that there is some reality in whatever fiction there has been, and that is ultimately the truth. The second point is that a lot of the writing, the question was made from the back about the readers pushing or being in control of this process. I think the publishers demand a certain kind of writing, and if the writer is not a big enough name to say he's going to write whatever he's going to write, then he has to follow the way that the market is going. And Urvashi will bear me out. I started writing short stories 25 years ago, and I wanted to write only short stories. And every time I'd send 6 or 10 short stories to a publisher, they'd say, yes, very nice, but when can we see a novel? And then ultimately I had no idea that one had to write a novel to get the short stories published 20 years later. So these are the realities of this literary process that carries on. It varies from country to country, it varies from society, but not too much. So whether we write fiction or not non-fiction, I think what we need to celebrate, and places like Jaipur are the places to celebrate it, good writing, of whatever form it is. Thank you.
I just sound like a, like the fading chorus to what everyone's already said. And I'm glad that we're all coming to a place where everyone is sort of agreeing on what we're saying, that it's eventually about good writing, and that eventually that is all that matters, whether it's fiction or it's non-fiction. It should be something, there are engaging characters, there is drama, there is stuff, something that moves you and that you can that you can connect with. And eventually it doesn't matter if that's fiction or non-fiction. And the thing that I was trying to say earlier about The Life of Pi, which was, my little example on this, was if you read the novel, it's about this boy who's on a raft with a tiger. And eventually it seems that maybe that is not really the real story. And the boy is just on the raft with himself, and there's something that's within him that represents the tiger. And he asks the question in the novel, he says, would you have preferred that version? Wouldn't it have been much more boring? And the man who's come to interview him says, yes, actually, don't even go there. I'll just go away with the tiger story because that's so much better. And it makes the same point and does it brilliantly. So I think I'm sort of agreeing with, and I think we've come to a very good place and a very correct place, that eventually it's about good writing that moves you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, every time Namita, William, Sanjoy, and Shuli organize a debate at Jaipur, everyone ends up agreeing with everybody else at the end. So this is yet another example of the same thing happening. I want to say two things in my closing statement, and this first thing doesn't count as that. The first is that the kind of readers that writers and publishers are looking for are inclusive readers who read everything, clearly, fiction, non-fiction, within fiction who read novels and short stories, poetry and plays, and within non-fiction who read the entire gamut of literary forms that non-fiction includes. And I want to tell you a story which somewhat, like Shashi did, which somewhat reflects my take on this. I have an author that some of you may know called Salma, who comes from a very, very tightly knit, deeply conservative Muslim community in a small part of Tamil Nadu, and who was pulled out of school, as girls are in her community, when she started menstruating, and kept at home for 8 years in readiness for marriage, more or less incarcerated within the 4 walls of the house, hardly ever allowed to go out. At age 20, Salma was married into an equally conservative family and into an extremely violent marriage. And she lived again with the burqa inside her house. But all the time, as she was growing up in her own home and in her married home, her incarcerators, if you can call them that, among whom were her elder brother, who's a writer, and her mother, did something which often happens and which we don't hear about. The elder brother smuggled in books for Salma to read, knowing of her deep desire to read and study. The mother smuggled out poems that Salma wrote and published them under a pseudonym, deeply erotic, wonderful poetry about the female body. And in the literary conservative world of Tamil Nadu, this woman, whose name nobody knew, who was called Salma, became famous for her erotic poetry. No one knew who she was. And then something happened to change her life. The 1992 legislation, which brought in 33% reservation for women at panchayat and municipal levels in India, happened. The village to which Salma belonged became a reserved category. Her husband, who had traditionally stood for elections, could no longer stand. They asked every woman in the family if she would stand in for them, thinking they could put up a proxy. Every woman refused. Finally, desperate, they asked Salma. She agreed. She went out to campaign. The first thing that happened was the burqa came off because you cannot campaign without a face. She won the election. She moved from village level politics to state level politics very soon. She wrote a novel which was published in Tamil and in English and is now internationally known all over the world. The novel is about the lives of Muslim women in her community. It tells the story of a young girl who is obviously her. It has lots and lots of other characters. It's a beautiful piece of fiction. And I love it, I've published it, and I wish that she had written her life and not that novel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Urvashi, which brings us back to the audience. I'm going to ask you to vote. The proposition is, the House proposes that the center of literary action is moving from the novel to non-fiction. Those of you who would like to vote for the motion, please raise your hand. And for those of you who vote against the motion, please raise your hand. I think we're more or less evenly divided, which brings us to a happy end to this first debate, opening debate. Thank you all very much for being here. Just to end, on behalf of Namita, William, Shuli, Ankur, and all my colleagues, just to invite you to join us at the opening on the 20th of January, at the wonderful Rambagh Palace Hotel in Jaipur, which is where we launch the festival, thanks to Ram Rathore and his colleagues there. We look forward to being there. We look forward to seeing you all there. Do remember to please register online. Thank you very much to the Taj. Please join us for cocktails and drinks and Glenlivet outside. To our wonderful panelists, thank you all very much for coming here for the debate, and for all of you. Till we meet again in January, a Happy New Year, a Merry Christmas, and have a wonderful evening. Good night. Thank you to join us at the opening on the 20th of January, at the wonderful Rambagh Palace Hotel in Jaipur, which is where we launch the festival, thanks to Ram Rathore and his colleagues there. We look forward to being there. We look forward to seeing you all there. Do remember to please register online. Thank you very much to the Taj. Please join us for cocktails and drinks and Glenlivet outside. To our wonderful panelists, thank you all very much for coming here for the debate, and for all of you. Till we meet again in January, a Happy New Year, a Merry Christmas, and have a wonderful evening. Good night.